Hello, and thanks for joining us on Encore. Here in France, there's one paperback that outsells all others. Albert Camus' L'Étranger is translated as The Stranger if you're in the US, but it's known as The Outsider in the UK. Writer and Yale Professor Alice Kaplan joins us in the studio to talk about her book, Looking for the Stranger, as she charts the trajectory of this extraordinary novel. Alice Kaplan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Now, your book, Looking for the Stranger, charts the trajectory of this best-selling novel. It has sold more than 10 million copies here in France alone. You start with an interesting anecdote that the university groups you encounter, everyone has read L'Étranger, and sometimes they've even read it twice. Why? This is when they haven't even studied French on occasions. What is so universal about this book?
I really think it's the book that young people read. It's the first book that gives them the sense of the world of ideas. It's a rite of passage. It's something that you have to do to become a thinking person. Very strange that this little book and this flat narrator, Meursault, is somehow dictating intellectual life to generations of students, including you and me.
It's true. It's the first book I read in French.
Me too.
And you as well, indeed. Now, the form of your book is interesting because it's a biography of a piece of work. It's not a biography of a person or an author. Mm-hmm. It follows the novel and its publication. Why did you choose this form?
Because it's a book that has it's bigger than life, this book, and it's a book that has lasted, that has outlived its author. We know that Camus died tragically in a car accident when he was 46. The book left him and had a life of its own, and that's what really interested me. So I take Camus' point of view, but at a certain point, the book is taken over by generations of literary critics, by young people, by rock stars, by rappers, and just flies on its own. It's never stopped.
Okay,
Keeps going.
Well, let's take a look at the man behind this book. Camus is one of the giants of 20th century literature, and he's also a philosophical reference here in France. Let's take a look back at the life and work of this Nobel Prize-winning author. Charles Pellegrin has this report.
Ask about Albert Camus at any French bookshop, and everyday readers turn into wordsmiths.
He's the embodiment of a free spirit, of a southern spirit.
His writing was crystal clear, and on top of that, he was committed to a cause.
Being political while still being truthful is always beautiful. That's why he was beautiful.
The Nobel Prize winner had humble beginnings. He grew up in Bellecour, a working-class neighborhood of Algiers. His father died when he was 1. His mother was an illiterate house cleaner. In school, he quickly stood out as a gifted student, leading the way to a master's degree in philosophy. In 1940, he headed to occupied France to pursue a career in journalism. He joined resistance newspaper Le Combat to bring down Nazi Germany and the Vichy collaborationist government. After the war, his distaste for ready-made ideologies extended to a current of thought he once adhered to, communism. His strong criticism of the repression of the Soviet regime started an infamous feud with another literary giant of his time, Jean-Paul Sartre. His biggest moral dilemma occurred with the Algerian War of Independence in the 1950s. Torn between concern for the safety of his French Algerian mother and his anger at the treatment of indigenous Algerians by colonial France, he advocated in favor of full French citizenship for all Algerians. His lifetime of exploring the problems of human conscience led to him being awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1957. For his daughter, Catherine, the award made sense considering her father's popularity across the globe.
He addressed the problems that everyone faces around the world. He's very well liked and appreciated in India and Japan. Simply put, he spoke like a human being.
He died in a car crash in 1960. A tragic twist of fate for a man who never failed to recognize the innate absurdity of life.
Now, speaking of the absurd, you quote Camus in your book when you say that if he wants to be a philosopher, you have to write novels. The writer is associated with this school of the absurd. Would you describe the philosophy of the absurd when it comes to Camus?
One example really struck me. Camus, as a journalist, covered trials for Algiers Républicain. And at the end of one of these trials, he writes in his newspaper article that he hears the church bell ringing while the verdict is being pronounced. In The Stranger, he takes the church bell and he turns it into the horn of an ice cream truck. So Meursault can hardly hear the argument that his defense lawyer is making because this ice cream truck, horn is blasting. And to me, that's the absurd.
The ridiculousness of everyday life. Now, in its UK edition, your book is called Looking for the Outsider, because that's how we know it in the UK. But in the US, it's Looking for the Stranger. Now, there are two separate translations in English. Why this choice?
I call them existentialist twins because it's really the same translation by Stuart Gilbert that started the whole problem, because the British publisher in 1946 realized that there was a Polish novel that had just come out that had been translated as The Stranger. So just on his own, he changed it to The Outsider so he wouldn't have market competition. He didn't call the American publisher. He put it in the mail, and it arrived when it was too late for the American publisher to change the title. So it's had two titles ever since. And I think, as far as which title you like, I guess you like the one you're used to.
It's true that
for you, it's The Outsider.
For me, it's The Outsider. But do you think there is a different cultural context between a European readership and a North American one?
Well, I was trying to invent a theory before I found the answer in the archives. Could it be that the sense of social alienation is so acute in England, and that the U.S., with its melting pot culture, is much more focused on foreign nationals so that The Stranger works? I don't think so, actually. I think it's just an accident of marketing.
Okay. This novel was published during the occupation here in France in 1942. It got past the censor, and it had strong critical support from intellectuals and writers at the time. How do you think a novel like this would be received now?
Well, we know how it would be received now because it's constantly being questioned by post-colonial criticism because Camus does not name the Arab whom Meursault shoots on that beach. That was something that no one in France noticed. Now, the British critic Cyril Connolly, who introduced the first edition, was very much aware of this. I mean, this was decolonization. England was about to lose India. And he said, the Moorish mistress and the Arab, they must have the same love of life as Meursault. But the author doesn't pay the attention to them that he does to Meursault. So certainly that critique exists, but I have an explanation for why Camus does not name the Arab.
And what is that?
He read an American novel by James M. Cain called The Postman Always Rings Twice, and James M. Cain wanted to show murderers dehumanizing their victim. They refer to him as the Greek throughout this novel that takes place in a very racist atmosphere in Los Angeles. And I believe that Camus wanted to represent the racism of colonial Algeria. And he does it on purpose. He doesn't do it out of racism. He does it to represent racism.
Now, as a writer and a professor, your interests centre on post-war France and French culture. You've also written a book about the effect of France, a period spent in France, on three women. That's Jacqueline Bouvier, Susan Sontag, and Angela Davies. Now, I think we can understand the intellectual appeal for Davies and Sontag, but what about the young Jacqueline Bouvier, the lady who was to become Jackie Kennedy? How did France affect her?
Well, she actually became an editor late in her life after her husband died, and she established herself in New York. And she was a great scholar of 18th century France. She had visited the Sèvres porcelain factories and all the museums. She was a wonderful art critic. She wrote beautifully about the photographs of Algiers, the French photographer. So she's something of a stealth intellectual. We only see her in that pillbox hat and pink suit, and we don't realize she had a beautiful literary exchange with André Malraux, who lent the Mona Lisa to the United States while she was First Lady. And she wrote to him in French.
Oh, so the French side of Jackie Kennedy was the intellectual side, it appears. Now,
Yes.
just to finish, your cultural tip for us is a TV series called Un village français, or A French Village. It's actually set around the same time as Camus was writing, the occupation here in France. What is it that you like about this series?
Well, the thing that's wonderful about it is that it goes year by year, starting with the fall of France in 1940. And now the series is in 1945, the purge trials of the collaborators. The series has gone on so long with this beautiful stories, how everybody lives the occupation, all the conflicts, and it's not a black and white view. You know, for example, the mayor of a village and his sense of responsibility and where he feels he failed. So now in the seventh season, you actually have characters remembering what they did during the war, telling stories to justify what they did, and having flashbacks. So you see the work of historical memory begin in the TV show.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
Alice Kaplan, thanks so much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
Looking for the Stranger is available in English and French. We'll leave you with a short clip of season 5 from A French Village, airing in the US right now. Remember to check out our website, and you can also keep up with Encore on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.